as the crow flies on the Vance Crow podcast.
Dr. Robb Fraley, welcome to the podcast.
Vance, good to see you again.
So you are the former CTO of Monsanto. Many consider you the godfather of modern biotechnology and GMO crops. And you and I had planned an interview months ago to happen today. But then the coronavirus pandemic happened, and so we've changed everything. So I want to start off with a question. How are you weathering this storm? When did you first take coronavirus seriously, and what actions have you taken as a result?
Well, I'd say the last month it's gotten my attention. My wife and I and daughter have pretty much stayed at home with all the social distancing for the last several weeks. Every once in a while, I get out to the grocery store with my mask, and otherwise, I spend a lot of time here in my office doing a little reading and catching up on things, and trying to stay as active as I can with all the modern technology we have to stay connected.
So, at one point in time, you were at the helm of probably the most important agriculture company on the face of the earth. You were a part of a very small team, and now you're in retirement. So what is the difference between what you would have been doing if you'd have been running Monsanto right now and what you're doing in retirement?
Well, that's a big one. I've actually been retired for a little bit over a year, and then I consulted with Bayer, and so I'm just getting really fully into the transition. And I've looked at some other things to do and keep busy, but what I'm really passionate about is leading the outreach for science-based communication. Regarding really the importance of innovation in ag and the food chain. So, I'm keeping connected with several universities, several groups that are doing startup here in St. Louis, BioSTL and the Danforth Center. And then in the last month or so, I've become involved with the U.S. Ranchers and Farmers Alliance. I don't know if you know that organization, but their focus is on bringing all of the different ag food companies together across the ag and food chain, and really generate science-based messages regarding the importance of ag and food production, and using that vehicle to bring those voices together, to amplify them, and really to reach out directly to the consumer regarding the incredible importance of innovation in these industries.
I think that there could not be a better guest that I could have on right now than you, because we are about to enter a very, very important scientific conversation with the whole society, when it's going to be things like, when will we know that a vaccine is safe to use? At what point should we decide that we need to get the economy going relative to the safety of people? And you, as the one that was at the helm of a biotech company, as you're putting a new food into the market, what did you learn about what kind of testing people need to have to make them feel confident, and what sort of timelines, and where do you put your trust in a situation like this?
Well, certainly, in a highly regulated industry like the pharmaceutical industry, the agricultural industry, I always used to make the point that for us to introduce a new biotech seed or food into the marketplace, we would ultimately do the regulatory testing and submit data to the FDA, the USDA, and the EPA. And, since U.S. is such a major grain and food producer, those grains would also be exported or shipped to, 40 or 50 countries around the world. And so we would do additional testing based on, the import requirements from the various ministries of health, environment, technology from the various companies. So, there's a lot of work going on to do the testing and make sure that these products have the benefits that we're all hoping for. But I guess, if you ask me, Vance, the one thing that I've really learned is, although it takes incredible science to create great products, it also takes a real commitment to communication to the public and to our policy and decision makers to make sure that those products are accepted, they're understood, and reach the intended marketplace. And so one of the things that's going to be so important, whether we're developing a new food product or a new vaccine, is to reach out to the public and make sure that they understand clearly the benefits and the use and any of the challenges or issues associated with a new technology. So that needs to be a very public conversation. Over the years we've certainly seen.
Last night I ran a Twitter poll, which is certainly not scientific, right? You have no idea who's answering the poll. You may have self-selected just a whole bunch of people that already think like you. But I was really interested.
I don't remember getting that one. Did you send that one to me?
No, I just posted it, but I will send it to you. And the question was, how much testing would you have to have of a vaccine before you think it should become mandatory for participation in society, right? If you found out smallpox was back, we'd be back doing vaccines. So I put up there, is it 1 month, 6 months, 1 year or more, or never? And I was shocked because 46%, the last time I checked, 46% of the people said less than 6 months it would be okay to have a mandatory vaccine. And then you have the other 53% or whatever it is saying 1+ year or more. That is a political divide that is going to have to be bridged somehow, because you can't have 50% thinking one way and 50% thinking the other. How would you approach this issue, knowing that we don't actually know how long it'll take to come up with a vaccine?
Well, as you know, there's an incredible amount of science going on. I was just, over the last couple of weeks, I've been studying, the coronavirus outbreak and a lot of the science. And, one of the things that, as I think about reasons to be optimistic about this for the future, first of all, I mean, we've seen an incredible unifying set of responses from our caregivers and our healthcare community that's been remarkable. It's been, for me, it's been exciting to see how many companies, small, large, public, private companies, really dedicate efforts to create, PPEs and supplies and other materials that are needed to help combat the coronavirus. And of course, I have really been amazed at the public response. I'm so proud of how people have really handled, for many, this is probably, the greatest, healthcare threat or challenge they've seen in their life. So that's so, it gives me confidence for the future. But, as a scientist, I am blown away by the scientific community's response to really, addressing the coronavirus problem. I mean, for perspective, when the AIDS virus broke out several years ago, the technology was different. It really took years to get the sequence of the viral genome. In the case of the coronavirus, literally within weeks, when the outbreak occurred in China and the virus was first isolated, the scientists had already created the full-length sequence of the virus and shared that information broadly across the world, and that immediately enabled scientists to use DNA and nucleic acid detection technologies to come up with rapid tests. And just last week, Abbott announced that they have now a 5-minute test that can be conducted literally in the doctor's office. So that's exciting. But now, knowing the structure of the virus, people have been able to identify possible treatments. We know that the virus has been modified to bind to a particular receptor on the human cell. That's the ACE2 receptor. Knowing that, there's ways of designing interventions. Having that sequence of the virus S protein enables a variety of approaches to create vaccines. The last time I looked, there were over 40 different groups around the world taking different approaches to vaccines, which range from the very traditional approaches that have been used since the time of Louis Pasteur to now really more modern techniques using just a snippet of the viral genome and being able to create very potent antibody reactions and antigens that can be used for vaccines. So the scientific community has really responded. I expect to see a pretty rapid response in terms of being able to create vaccines that will be, thoroughly tested, very effective, and very safe. But I still think it gets down to the point that your survey emphasizes, and that is the science is one thing, but we will need an incredible communication effort. As you know, there's still a division in this country regarding the role of science and vaccines and everything from measles and mumps to other vaccines that some individuals are electing not to use for themselves or for their children. And I think, so much of that has been based on misinformation through social media and on the internet, that the only way to really address that is to make sure that the scientific efforts to create those vaccines are also accompanied by, a very transparent communication effort to ensure that people not only understand the benefits of that technology for themselves and for their family, but the importance of creating an immunity across the population so that we don't see subsequent cycles of outbreak as the economy opens up and people start to move again, and as we ultimately enter another flu season.
I felt like I was relatively naive just a few months ago. So I took a trip up to Alberta and everything was fine. It was way remote. But this was at the point when I definitely knew coronavirus was going on, and I had friends telling me that I should wear a mask. And then I was also hearing from the officials that, hey, you don't need to wear a mask. It really needs to be reserved for healthcare professionals. And you think on some level they were doing that maybe as a mistake on how well those things would work, or maybe they were doing it as a lie that allowed them to get the healthcare professionals the materials they needed. But either way, the rapid change from don't use masks to use masks now I think will cause a lot of problems when it comes to when to believe people on whether or not it's safe to come out of your houses, the other things around this disease, like how fatal is it? How contagious is it? What do you think needs to be done to bridge when you already have one major, international change of pace when they thought one thing and now we're going to another?
Well, I think that just reflects the fast movement. I mean, it was only a few months ago when WHO said that this virus didn't communicate from person to person. And, so there's, as the science has evolved and we've learned more, and, I'm sure you've seen studies on droplet transmission and, I've always thought myself that the calculations require both a numerator and a denominator. And until we really get the testing to the level.
Can you explain what that means, the denominator part of that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to determine how virulent something is if you don't know how many people are infected. And we really don't, because the only numbers we have are on those limited percent of the population that have actually been tested. And a variety of reports from different countries indicate that a large portion, I've seen numbers as high as 40, 50, 60% of the people who will actually ultimately be shown to have contacted the coronavirus are asymptomatic. So, the only thing we really know are the people who have tested positive, and, unfortunately, any fatalities that have been, confirmed as a result of it. But we really don't know the true state of the level of infection. Now, again, I think science comes to bear on that because they are going to be developing very sophisticated assays to determine if individuals have been infected, whether or not they carry antibodies to the coronavirus as an indicator, and that's going to give us the true indication of both the virulence and the lethality of the virus. So I think in the meantime, what I sense is that the information, although, if you think about it, this has been going on for really just a few very dramatic months, but we're learning a lot. And what I sense is that the communication and the information, both around the world and across the country and from the variety of different states is all now really coalescing into, general recommendations regarding, individual safety, PPE that are appropriate, isolation distances. And so, I think given the global nature of this pandemic, I'm actually, I guess I'm pretty optimistic on not only the way the public has responded, but the way the science is creating ultimately, I think, the ability to intervene and solve this particular crisis.
So you're in a rare position in that you just recently got done running a multinational corporation with employees all over the world. And one of the challenges of all businesses, but in particular in agriculture, is you can't stop the machines if you want to make sure crops are going to go in the ground and people are going to get fed. So if you were at the helm making employment decisions and trying to decide who's essential, what's essential, how do you keep going, how would you be thinking through this problem with your team?
Well, as you know, there's nothing more essential than, healthcare and food as we think about this crisis. And both, obviously both healthcare and everyone and all of the services affiliated with that, the transportation services, anyone affiliated with food or food production are essential services. And, there are some research projects that are essential. For example, the work that is underway right now to develop and transport the seeds that are going to be planted across the country this spring in order to produce the crops and food that we will need for the future. So, those are clearly essential, and those kind of activities are going on. Other areas, of research or can be handled remotely. There's a lot of, as you know, an explosion of ability to connect on social media with a variety of, and our company has been very advanced in that. So a lot of the efforts can continue in that way. But as important as agriculture and food production is, I'm also, concerned. The average age of a farmer in the United States is 58 years old. So almost by definition, they're in a high risk class.
Nobody's talking about that right now. Nobody is saying that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I guess if there is a lot of farming and a lot of agriculture isn't in high dense population areas, and some of the states with the most important to food production are those states that have lower population and expanses. So that's a bright side to this. What I do worry about is as we think about crops that are important to consumers. Still a large number of those crops need to be hand harvested, and I'm saddened by so many reports of crops that can't be harvested because there's not available labor today in order to pick the blueberries or pick some of the important vegetables, and so that's a challenge that could influence us significantly. Longer term. A fair amount of employees on farms come from Eastern Europe, come from South Africa, come from Australia. And so, as transportation communication and travel becomes limited, I think that could represent a challenge, for U.S. agriculture through this production season. So it's a top of mind concern even at this point.
So, what do you think is going to be the world is going to look like in 2 weeks? Will we have stayed in place? What will be going on with the economy? How do you think people will be thinking about their heading back to work in 2 weeks?
Well, it's a great question, and everybody has a view or an opinion. I mean, I'm looking at like everyone else the data in terms of infection rates and unfortunately, the deaths attributed to coronavirus. The general models are saying, that those are going to peak in the next couple of weeks. So, I hope in a few weeks, to answer your question, that we can start to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And, as I said earlier, I guess as a scientist, I'm always a bit of an optimist because there's so many, wonderful advances occurring, both in the biotechnology and the healthcare world that I think is really closing in on what will be a number of both treatments and immunizations and, tests to help understand, monitor, control, and eliminate the coronavirus.
So you've been a person that has been able to see the future and act on it, make investments into biotech, into scientists that their results of their work isn't going to play out for 10, 15, 20 years. What right now do you think with the wild impacts that coronavirus is having on the economy and things that are changing, what do you think is going to change the most? Where do you see the horizon looking different now that we're heading into a post-corona world?
Let me do it two ways. Let me do, first of all, the things that I think we need to reflect on. So the first thing is, I mean, like everybody else, I go to the grocery store and it's hard to find, certain supplies, whether it's toilet paper or hand sanitizers or alcohol. But so far, we've been blessed in this country that the food supply is there. So I can never take it for granted, but one of the things that I just want to put a real shout out for is everybody who is involved in the food production system, and from the farmers and the processors to the folks involved in shipping and transportation to the folks who are stocking the shelves and at the checkout counter. They've been doing a wonderful job, and never want to take it for granted. But, one of the things that in general we haven't worried about is the availability of food. And so many people have, contributed to supplying food for shelters and contributions and volunteers. I think we can look back and say one of the real strengths of this country and one of the real blessings is that we are a food secure country. And, not only can we meet our own demands, but, we ship food to countries around the world. And, at a time like this, I'm glad that's an industry that we haven't outsourced. It's an industry that we can count on. And I think it really points to how important it is.
If I can interrupt you there, so you and I have known each other for a long time. And I know that when you and I were both going out and speaking, you had always had a place where you said local matters. You've got to have these other versions like organic and other means of production. And to be totally honest, Robb, I thought you were kind of putting people on about that. I thought you were the head of the large corporation that had to kind of pat the other system on the head to be like, oh, that's a nice thing. But now in coronavirus, I am shocked awake to the idea that we need a variety of food systems. You need people that are producing on the local level so that you can have ways of getting chicken and beef and fresh vegetables that are outside of the traditional system, so that way when we apply the pressure by not having restaurants or not having nearly as many, you have other outlets. So I was very, very shocked by how much my belief in efficiency at all costs was really pretty wrong. Do you feel that sense now that you're watching how the food system is changing? I mean, it's been very resilient. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, I think, as I've always said, I mean, I start from the consumer, and what our role is, I think in the food production system is to meet that demand that the consumer has. Unfortunately, in this country, we have a variety of consumer interests. We have a variety of production systems. We have a variety of both crop and animal products that that fill our shelves and our food supply. And I absolutely believe that that's a strength of our country, to be able to have that kind of local production and different technologies, different paths to production, I think all complement it. I think that the great thing about local production, of course, is that it does provide that resiliency you're talking about. I think it also, gets more and more people engaged in what is truly a vital industry. I mean, in this country, probably less than 2% of the population is involved in agriculture. Probably another 15 or 20% is involved in food processing and food production and delivery. So it's still a very important part of our economy, and it's been very resilient. So in addition to that, I think the other thing I would hope for is that people realize that we have had a pandemic challenge like this almost every 10 years. You can go back to AIDS, you can go back to SARS, you can go to MERS, and now the COVID-19. Nature is always going to throw changes and curveballs, really, in terms of new pathogens and new pests. And so for me, one of the things that, again, I'm just so in awe of is how the advanced scientific tools, whether it's the speed at which we can sequence a genome or the ability to rapidly identify the portion of that virus gene that can allow us to make the best antibodies or the best vaccines. That is now literally done in days and weeks versus months or years just a bit ago. And so that investment in research, whether it's public sector research, private sector research, and frankly, whether it's in healthcare or dealing with crop pests or livestock diseases, it is really an important investment and an insurance policy for us in the future, knowing that we are inevitably going to be addressing these types of challenges in a global world. And so, I hope one of the things that comes out of this is that we all understand and recognize, the importance of the investment that this country and frankly countries around the world, make in the kind of basic research and science that gives us the capability to understand, respond, and mitigate with the speed at which we can do today. I know, we live in a world where everything is almost instantaneous, and that's really the expectation. And I look at the scientific response to the coronavirus and where we stand and how many entities around the world are engaged in solutions that you literally can see every day that are coming on the internet or in press releases or on the television programs. It is mind-boggling to see the effort and the approaches that are taking to help defeat this endemic.
So when you think about the new technology that's coming online, the speed with which things are happening, the amount of sharing that's going on, what do you think is the role of IP, intellectual property, in all of this? Because you've been in a world where so much of your technology was protected by patents, but we're in a different game. So do you have any thoughts on how we should think about IP during the time of a pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's always a balance between the IP protection and licensing and broad use. And, in our case, with the history of products we developed, one of the things that I was always the proudest about Vance was early on we made the decision to license our technology broadly. So while our company enjoyed the benefits of biotech traits or new products with our seeds, we also licensed I think over 200 other companies, including some of what would have been viewed as our toughest competitors.
So for people that aren't aware of seeds, is that in the seed industry, you have seeds that you're growing that are competitive. Pioneer has seeds that are different than Monsanto's at the time, which would be Bayer now. And what you're saying is we allowed a genetic engineered solution that we had put in our seeds to be used in somebody else's seeds. They paid us a fee for using that, but they were also able to go out to the market. So it wasn't like you can only get these protections if you buy Monsanto seeds. So just for people that aren't aware of how that works.
Vance, you got that down well, and like I said, it was really one of our most important decisions, and we broadly licensed that technology. But the other thing, and I think directly to the point of your question, was we also donated that technology broadly through collaborations with the Gates Foundation, through specific organizations that were involved in transfer of technology to developing countries. In fact, as I go back in just a little bit of ancient history for you, even before we launched the first biotech seed products in the U.S. in 1996 and 1997, we had already worked with others and in an effort that was led by Dr. Norman Borlaug to license free of charge that technology to a number of developing countries and organizations that would be, creating and sharing that technology. So I think, to the heart of your question, IP under special conditions like this is really the beginning of the ability to license and exchange technology. And so, I think it's always a balancing act between the reward of intellectual property that encourages companies to make the investment, and then the judicial use of that IP to make sure that it reaches the public and has its greatest benefit. So, you'd asked me the question about how life is going to look after this is over, and I talked about the importance of supporting basic science and the importance of agriculture. I think there's going to be some changes in agriculture.
What is that? What changes do you think?
Well, I think, a couple of things that I see changed as a result of working our way through this pandemic. We talked about one, labor availability. We bring a lot of labor in to manage our farms. So immigration challenges and just movement of people is something that's top of mind. I think one of the ramifications of that is it's going to encourage even more investment in automation and robotics on the farm. We're going to have to be more creative on how we harvest, how we produce and process food. And I think it's going to put even more focus on phytosanitary measures, how we package, how we distribute. I think those are going to be top of mind for consumers and, will be both areas of challenge, but also a business opportunity as we go forward.
As you say that with the business opportunity, the thing that I think is really important is cities preparing for starting back up, because I think that we're going to have, in my opinion, the way that the containment will end up rolling out is that cities on their own regions will say, hey, we've got it pretty well contained. We're going to start opening up. So whichever cities make the changes that they need to allow manufacturing and other types of work to come, we're going to reshore a lot of things. And my hope is that St. Louis becomes not only the biotech hub, the plant hub, but the drone hub. I hope that we change the rules, whatever we need to do to make it as valuable as possible to be in this place making agricultural drones. That's what I want to see.
Yeah, I think the robotics and the automation will be big. I think the phytosanitary, whether it's assays, screens, packaging, will be top of mind. I think the other thing to think about longer term is, I think we will see more of a shift coming out of this in how people eat. And so as a result of that, I don't know how you spent a lot of your time, but I've probably done more cooking in the last 2 months and than I have in the last few years. And I think we're going to see pattern changes in terms of what crops we will grow, what foods people will eat, how those foods will be prepared and processed. So that's, again, both going to be an opportunity and a challenge. I think the other thing that we'll see influencing, and I'll talk about it through the agriculture and the rural lens, the need to be connected going through this crisis has been top of mind for everybody, and social media has played a huge role in that. There's a large part of the U.S. and rural America that still doesn't have high-speed internet and still doesn't have the connectivity that we're going to need. And I think that's going to put an additional focus on, as we think about rebuilding our infrastructure. I think that's going to be very important and top of mind as we think about the things we need to do for the future.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, I was saying this the other day on Twitter. Not only the rural one is a huge one, and that one's a really difficult problem to solve because it takes a lot of infrastructure for few people, but also in the cities, the city that has the most access to fiber internet to super high speed will have a huge incentive for people to move there, to have their houses there, because if you have another pandemic and you're locked in, you're going to want to be able to use way more technology than what we're even using right now. Like, just webcams on computers won't be what we're doing. In 5 years, we'll have have you ever tried a virtual reality headset?
Absolutely.
I mean, there is no reason by the time we have the next pandemic that people aren't doing work virtually with those on, because it's so much more encompassing of an experience. You could do so much more, but you can't do it unless you have high-speed internet. So my hope is this is a call to cities, people that are organizing it, to say, do what it takes to get fiber everywhere.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, whether it's broadly how we communicate, how we do business, how we procure our goods and services, and frankly, and probably most important from a rural perspective, how we deliver healthcare. The various telemedical connections that could and should be available are going to be right at the top of the list. So I see all of those being.
Have you seen a doc doing teledoc yet?
Oh yeah,
it's awesome. It's like the best thing my wife has a physical therapy business, and she went to doing virtual. She now is consulting with people that are having pain when they're running. She just says, take a video from this angle, from a video from that angle, ship it to me. I can analyze it. We'll get on the phone and we can fix your running problem. And this has got to be happening all over the country right now. And
we're going to see an explosion of sensors, diagnostic kits, devices that do a variety of monitoring. So, those are all going to be accelerated, both in terms of their importance, but also, I think, this has been a period of rapid adoption, probably by a lot of new users. And so we will have trained a new component of the of our population to expect and demand these kind of services. So I think that's across agriculture, food production, healthcare, a broad impact.
Well, what do you think? I mean, I think one of the ways that innovation is already happening faster is we've knocked down regulation. And there may be some level of regulation that you have to have, but this might be a good time for us to have a brush fire and see what grows back as necessary.
Well, I'm always a fan of that. I mean, it's always the balance between, the protection you provide versus the cost and the speed. And, I think what's important is that all of that gets reexamined, because, both are important, and we just need to make sure we're at the right middle ground to do both.
So, final question. You marshaled the intellectual efforts of thousands of scientists, some of the most brilliant scientists in the plant world. Right now, scientists are incredibly important in this fight of coronavirus. What advice do you have for people leading groups of scientists? How do you keep people motivated? How do you keep them working through a time of fear? What do you have to say that can help people learn from what you learned over the many years of running Monsanto?
Well, I tell you, the first thing is that individuals are just incredibly passionate, and I think the call to action that whether it's the challenge to address the quick response to a coronavirus, whether it's the challenge to continue to increase the yields and productivity of food crops so that we can meet the demand of 10 billion people, or the development of new methods that allow us to farm more sustainably and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I think there's a high level motivation. Now, the biggest challenge is keeping individuals, making sure they observe the appropriate social distancing and the things that we need to do in the short term to work our way through the pandemic. But I have never, ever seen a lack of passion or interest. But what I hope, again, is that, as a society, both in the U.S. and around the world, we understand the importance of investing in the basic sciences across healthcare, agriculture, animal and crop agriculture, because, we need these innovations in healthcare. We need innovations in agriculture to continue to meet, the escalating demand for food, but also, producing crops in a way that is more sustainable and more beneficial to the planet. And so I think, these are some of the most important careers there are in the world. I think they have enormous benefit to society. And I think as I reflect going through this pandemic, as I said, I am in awe of how the scientific community has responded broadly to these challenges, and I think in many ways it can help lead the what I sense is going to occur later on is we will get through this. We will get through this because we've all worked and we've all pulled together. A big part of that has been the medical community and the first responders and all of the companies that have engaged to help meet the demand. And I think this can be a real unifying impact across our culture and society. And I really hope for that. So I'm an optimist. I believe we will weather this storm and we will come out the other side stronger, smarter, and better prepared to address the next challenge that nature turns our way.
And if people wanted to follow you or comment on anything we've talked about here on how can they get a hold of you?
Well, a couple of ways. So I'm just putting in my own website, Robb Fraley. But on Twitter, my Twitter handle is @Robb Fraley, ROBB FRALEY, and you can always follow me on LinkedIn. And so.
And if people comment to you, they can talk with the CTO of the former largest biotech company in the history of the planet.
Well, Vance, I don't know if I can live up to that reputation, but I can tell you it's really exciting to be here, hunkered down on the sideline, watching and reading and seeing how scientists around the world are addressing this challenge, and how our healthcare workers and our healthcare community is responding. We have a lot to be thankful for, and for me, it's all about those individuals and what they've done. Those are the heroes that matter.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk. I hope you view your scientific knowledge and leadership as something that's essential. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Vance. All the best, and keep on with the podcast.
Thank you.